The Philippine shipping industry is quite a fragile one. Seems like every 10 years the industry changes so much that you can't even recognize it. I mean, already in this decade alone, records have been set and historic vessels have been sent to the scrapyards. However, there was one company that used to operate that, time by time, changed the industry every 5 years, it seemed. However, due to a couple of safety oversights and one unfortunate disaster, lost it all. This is What Happened, Episode 1. The line was originally established when a Chinese merchant from Amoy came over to the Philippines. His name was Don Sulpicio. When he was young, he and his brother started a shipping enterprise in the Eastern Visayas. It slowly grew in popularity into a mid-sized shipping company. However, the line began experiencing problems when many of their ships were drafted and then destroyed in World War II. The company ceased operations, and to gain more insight into the ferry industry, he joined Carlos A. Gothic Lines. He would eventually go on to found Sulpicio Lines on September 1st, 1973. Like his old company, it would mainly cater to the Eastern Visayas, where eventually the line would expand into routes like Manila to Cebu, Manila to Iloilo, and even Manila to Zamboanga, one of the longest routes in the country. However, disaster would strike when in 1987, one of their ships, the Sulpicio Line's MV Doña Paz, would sink, killing over 4,000 people. This was the worst peacetime maritime disaster in history and still is today. Even worse, the ship was originally named after the owner of the line, so it was a pretty big symbolic and also corporate loss. A year after the sinking of the Doña Paz as well, its sister ship, the Doña Marilyn, would also sink in a storm. The line would do a complete rebranding and actually set quite a couple of records in safety and comfort. As you can see in this photo, the deck of the ship is almost lined with life rafts. And all those life rafts on the top of the ship would unfortunately be needed, as in 1998, almost 10 years after the Doña Marilyn sinking, a typhoon in the Philippines caused the Princess of the Orient to sink. This was especially shocking considering the size of the ship. The 2000s would be the last and also most eventful years for the line. They again went under a complete rebranding, this time actually being quite successful. The line had no major sinkings, but, of course, the 10-year thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the video just had to happen again. Throughout the line's entire history, it had had quite a rivalry with a company named WG&A. However, it's not like this decade would be uneventful for them, as WG&A broke up, turning into both Gothic Lines and Super Ferry, big competitors to Sulpicio Lines in their final days. Although the line wasn't immune to disaster either, and in fact, this ferry on screen had quite an eventful story that not a lot of people talk about. However, Super Ferry would survive the incoming perfect storm a lot better than Sulpicio Lines would, quite literally. On June 20th, 2008, a typhoon was striking the Philippines, and the only ship sailing was the Princess of the Stars. It was sailing south toward Cebu and was given clearance due to the size of the vessel. It was thought unsinkable. Remember last time that happened? The ship was battered by waves and eventually rolled over onto its side, being found later with 800 people dead. The Princess of the Stars story is truly amazing, and I recommend you look more into it, or just watch one of my videos, which I'll link above and also in the description. After the disaster, all vessels were grounded and were not allowed to sail when the typhoon restrictions lifted. Eventually, the ships were painted in the infamous final livery of Sulpicio Lines. However, eventually the company would rename itself, and so every single ship had its funnel repainted one last time. 7 years after the Princess of the Stars disaster, the Certificate of Public Convenience was finally revoked from Sulpicio Lines, now called Philippine Span Asia Carrier Corp. This destroyed what was formerly the largest Philippine ferry company in history. All of their ships, except for one, were sold for scrap. However, not all hope is lost for Sulpicio Line's fans. In fact, the Princess of the Earth is still sailing today as the Transasia 10. She is likely to be scrapped someday in the near future, however, if I ever do go to the Philippines, it's on the top of my bucket list. This had brought an end to what was nearly 33 years of service in the Philippines. As mentioned, however, Sulpicio Lines technically still exists, as Philippine-Span Asia Carrier Corp. However, the company's misfortunes haven't ended, as in 2013, one of their ships would ram a Tugo Lines vessel, St. Thomas Aquinas. Tugo is basically the modern-day equivalent to Super Ferry, and it still exists today. And that is the end of the story. Sulpicio Lines will, I think, always be remembered by those who sailed on their ships. They were very influential in the industry, and although the company may now be gone, Don Sulpicio will always be remembered for the contributions he made to the Philippine shipping industry, although those contributions never always went well. Anyways, this was the first episode of What Happened. See you later.